to see if they can figure out what on earth they are hearing.
You know what it is, don't you? You're no help at all, Chris.
Sue tried to press her buzzer, but it was just the base of her back.
You heard it here first with me, Chris McCausland.
I've got tears running down my face.
On BBC Sounds and Radio 4's shiny new comedy slot, 11 p.m. on Saturday nights.
Hello and welcome to the Number One with me, Johnny Diamond. After a 2-week Israeli military operation, Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital is in ruins.
I saw patients who were left without medical care. I saw people screaming and crying. They are looking for their loved ones.
We hear from a journalist who's visited the hospital complex and will speak to a spokesman for the Israeli military. Nearly 800 people arrived on small boats over the weekend. Are the government's methods of deterrence working?
The people who are coming across in large numbers are coming for quite different reasons probably than the Albanians were coming, and so it may be that they are less dissuaded by some of the things that the government has been doing, for example.
And
here comes the sun, here comes the sun, I say it's alright.
the BBC stands accused of meteorological pessimism. We'll investigate the psychology of weather signals. The BBC News is read by James.
The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says dozens of bodies have been found at the territory's biggest hospital, Al-Shifa, after the Israeli military completed a 2-week operation at the site. Israel says it killed and detained hundreds of Hamas fighters during the raid, which has left much of the hospital in ruins. Our Middle East correspondent Gulan now reports from Jerusalem.
Footage shows piles of rubble and burnt-out buildings where Gaza's largest hospital once stood, with Palestinian bodies left lying in the dirt. Hundreds of locals have returned to check on the damage to surrounding neighbourhoods, with large areas razed in the fierce battles between Israel and Palestinian gunmen. The Israeli military says it seized senior Hamas figures, as well as weapons and intelligence documents, in its surprise raid at the hospital, the second of the war. While it sees this operation as having dealt a major blow to its enemy, some Israeli commentators said it was also a worrying sign of the ability of Hamas to regroup in places that had previously been conquered, and underscored the need for a convincing post-war strategy.
Police in the southern Israeli town of Tel Sheva say they've arrested a sister of the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. Sabah Abdel Salam Haniyeh, who's 57, is due to appear in court after being detained on suspicion of having links with the militant group. The BBC has been told that 10 Conservative MPs have signed an amendment about government plans to criminalise half sleeping. Homelessness charities have described the proposals, which are due to be voted on before the general election, as cruel and unnecessary. Here's our political correspondent Georgia Roberts.
The Criminal Justice Bill was introduced under the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman as part of efforts to project a Conservative Party tough on crime. But it could now prove another test of how tough Rishi Sunak's prepared to be with his often problematic backbenchers. Included in the bill are measures which would give the police powers to move on, fine or potentially jail rough sleepers deemed to be a nuisance in England and Wales. The BBC understands the government's in discussions with potential Conservative rebels who want to remove these powers from the bill, led by the MP for Harrow East, Bob Blackman. It's understood large numbers of centre-leaning Conservatives are prepared to rebel on the bill over concerns the powers are too punitive, risking its passage through Parliament. Opposition MPs also back the efforts. Number 10 says it's engaging with MPs about the plans in the usual way.
The Home Office says a further 442 people in 9 small boats crossed the Channel yesterday, taking the total number of arrivals so far this year to more than 5,000. That's a rise of 43% compared with the first 3 months of 2023. 20 councillors in Lancashire have resigned from the Labour Party, accusing it of draconian shift in policy and bullying. It comes as Labour faces major debates over its position on the Israel-Gaza conflict. Ruth von Pendle said senior party officials were stifling free speech and threatening to remove them as candidates in the local election. The Labour Party has been contacted for comment. Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf has defended a new hate crime law, which was introduced this morning, saying it will deal with a rising tide of hatred. Some senior police officers have warned that the legislation could erode trust in the police, while while critics, including the author J.K. Rowling, claim it could stifle freedom of speech. Our Scotland editor James Cook reports.
Scotland's Hate Crime and Public Order Act came into force at midnight. It consolidates and expands the law on crimes aggravated by prejudice and creates a crime of stirring up hatred relating to age, disability, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, or being intersex. Stirring up racial hatred was and remains illegal. The law does not cover biological sex. On social media, J.K. Rowling responded with a series of posts about transgender women, concluding by saying she looked forward to being arrested if what she had written qualified as an offence. Separately, in response to general criticism of the Act, Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf said unless someone behaved in a threatening or abusive manner with the intent of stirring up hatred, then they had nothing to worry about.
The main opposition party in Turkey says yesterday's local elections were not free or fair, despite winning its largest victory in almost half a century. The CHP said voters had rejected the polarisation and populism of President Erdogan. The party won all 5 of Turkey's largest cities, including Istanbul and the capital, Ankara. The Russian government has dismissed accusations that one of its military intelligence units has been responsible for a mystery illness that's affected US diplomats. An investigation by the Insider, Der Spiegel and CBS alleges that Americans who suffered from Havana syndrome were targeted with direct energy weapons. More details from Rachel White.
Havana syndrome was first identified in Cuba's capital city in 2016, when US diplomats began to complain of dizziness, headaches and a painful sound in the ears. More than 1,000 reports of the condition have been made since then. US officials suggested that those affected could have been hit by microwaves from hidden devices, but they said it was unlikely a foreign power was to blame. Now evidence has emerged suggesting that operatives from a Russian military intelligence unit may have targeted the brains of US diplomats with directed energy weapons. The report said the evidence placed members of the unit in cities around the world at times when American personnel reported feeling unwell. But the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the accusations were baseless and unfounded.
One of Hong Kong's best-known independent bookshops is shut down as freedom of expression in the territory comes under further pressure. The owners of Mount Zero Books blamed the closure on a large number of inspections carried out by the Chinese local authorities in response to anonymous complaints. Hong Kong's cultural sector has been affected by fears of censorship since national security laws passed in 2020.
Thank you very much. The latest battle for Al-Shifa Hospital in the Gaza Strip is over. The medical complex, whose buildings cover much of a large city block in Gaza, was for the last fortnight the target of the Israeli military. A terrorist lair, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it last night. He says Israel killed 200 terrorists at Al-Shifa and discovered weapons and information connected to its battle with Hamas. The Israeli military says 900 people were detained in and around Al-Shifa, with more than 500 of them subsequently found to be members of either Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This was the second time Israel has conducted a military operation at Al-Shifa. It laid siege to the complex in November last year. The World Health Organization says 21 patients died inside the hospital complex in the past fortnight, while Palestinian media say dozens of bodies have been found in the vicinity of the complex. The city block where the hospital sits is a scene of complete desolation. Many buildings littered with rubble, those still standing, scorched by fire and clearly battered by explosions. I spoke to Mutasem Daloul, a Palestinian journalist for the Middle East Monitor, who just visited Al-Shifa Hospital. You may find some of what he says distressing.
I saw something unprecedented I have never seen in my life. All the buildings of the Shifa Hospital either completely partially or partially destroyed. Those which are destroyed are burned. I saw people screaming and crying. They are looking for their loved ones who were lost during the ground invasion of the Israeli occupation forces. I saw one of the patients dying because of the lack of medical care. I was crying when I interviewed these patients. One of the patients has his legs amputated. His father was detained and he was left alone. No one went to Al-Shifa hospital after the withdrawal of the Israeli occupation to evacuate him or to look after him. He was left for flies to eat his body. I saw mass graves. I saw mothers screaming. One of the mothers was screaming and shouting loudly for her son, who she identified from his clothes. The loss of Al-Shifa hospital is a loss for every Palestinian because it was the hospital used for patients, for treating patients.
You mentioned seeing dead and injured people around the hospital complex, and you also mentioned seeing mass graves. Can you tell me what you saw and what kind of numbers you are talking about?
I don't know the numbers because the mass graves, I didn't see how many people are in the mass graves. I saw parts of the bodies of dead people appearing from the earth. I saw when you enter from the eastern side to the front yard of the Al-Shifa hospital, you find on your right hand side mass grave between 10 to 15 bodies. I saw parts of their bodies appearing on the surface of the ground. I saw these bodies scattered every side of the destroyed buildings of the hospital.
Did you see any evidence that this was being used by militants or paramilitaries from Hamas? Because as you know, that is why Israel says it went into Al-Shifa, and it says it found killed more than 200 Hamas terrorists, what it calls terrorists.
I don't know what kind of evidence I have to notice in order to tell you that this is an evidence that proves the terrorists, like what Israel is calling them, using the hospital. For me, the people, the resistance people, don't have hospitals or places like the hospitals or refugee shelters where thousands of people are taking refuge because they know that they are wanted and they could be targeted any time, so that they don't want to put the life of civilians in danger. I don't see any sign of people who are armed or carrying out resistance action. I went to a hospital several times. I didn't see any sign of it. I saw government officials giving directions to doctors, giving directions to administrative directions to workers who reoperated the Al-Shifa hospital after the first invasion. I saw them, yes, but I didn't see military people. It is not justification for the Israeli occupation to call them terrorists because they are part of Hamas or the government of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and they say or call Hamas a terrorist organization.
That was Mutasem Dalloul, a Palestinian journalist in Gaza. Melanie Ward is the chief executive of the charity Medical Aid for Palestinians. She first told me what she is hearing from her colleagues on the ground about the situation in Al-Shifa hospital after the Israeli withdrawal.
What we're hearing and what I've seen photographic and video evidence of is that Shifa Hospital has been completely destroyed, and that there is enormous fear and confusion on the ground about the condition of the patients. There were over 100 patients who we've been advocating for, and it's become very clear that they haven't had adequate food, water, medical care, medical supplies. To give you an example, there are two children who we have been trying to help over the last couple of weeks, Rafiq and Rafif, who are 14 and 15-year-old brother and sister. They have limb amputations because they managed to survive an Israeli airstrike on their home, but they both need further medical care, and Rafiq in particular has got very serious infected wounds. His sister found him alone in a room without food and water. She said that he has maggots coming out of all of his limbs. And then today the children's uncle was able to reach the hospital because he'd been made to leave by the Israelis about 10 days ago, and he said that both of the children were covered in feces and maggots, and there is now complete confusion about where to take the children. Rafik in particular, his life is definitely in danger. He urgently needs surgery and proper medical care. But now in the north of Gaza, there are only around 200 hospital beds left in a population which is living in famine conditions in the middle of a horrific war and where disease is rife. So there is utter fear, confusion. There were numerous attempts at international evacuation of the patients from the hospital, which the Israeli military consistently refused to comply with or delayed.
What are you hearing from medical staff, if anything? I understand the situation is chaotic to say the least. But what are you hearing from medical staff about the conditions there?
So some of the medical staff themselves were detained, and we were very concerned about them. So one of them in particular, we know was detained and held for the last 48 hours. We heard that he has been released, but we don't know about the condition of all of the medical staff. We don't know if they are all accounted for. There are a number of dead bodies in the grounds of the hospital, so nobody knows who they are yet.
The images emerging from Al Shifa show a hospital, if not entirely destroyed, then clearly out of commission. Those buildings that have not been turned into rubble have been devastated. This is no longer a functioning hospital, is it?
It's not, and there are no longer any fully functioning hospitals in Gaza, but this one is not functioning at all. And Shifa Hospital, where my organisation Medical Aid for Palestinians had worked for many years to build up the quality of care in areas like care for premature babies, the fact that it's been destroyed is just horrifying.
That was Melanie Ward of Medical Aid for Palestinians. Lieutenant General Peter Lerner is a spokesman for the IDF, the Israeli military. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Johnny. It's actually Lieutenant Colonel.
I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel.
That's upgrade.
I promoted you there. The Israeli Prime Minister says that more than 200 what he called terrorists were killed in this operation. Do you have any idea how many civilians were killed?
Johnny, the IDF went 2 weeks ago into Shifa, the compound, due to extensive intelligence that revealed that hundreds of Hamas terrorists had taken up positions, utilizing the premises, different wards, different buildings, to conduct the command and control capabilities, communicate with the forces in the north of the Gaza Strip, and effectively it created a northern fortress within the Gaza Strip, within the premises of the Shifa compound. And so when we operated 2 weeks ago in a surprise raid on the compound, we did it with two things in mind. First of all, to take charge of those terrorists that are taking up in the compound. And secondly, to try and distinguish between the civilians that are taking refuge. And indeed, we evacuated over 6,000 people that were taking refuge in the premises, civilians that were evacuated from the site. And at the same time, we've maintained the operational capabilities of the hospital. And when we had to shift from building to building, we then moved people around and created separate buildings that could facilitate the ongoing medical needs of the civilians that remained on the premises. What we found throughout the combat is that as we were moving forward, Hamas terrorists were engaging in the premises of the hospital, so it indeed was a war zone, a combat zone. And what we found was that they were utilizing our small machine guns, AK-47s, Kalashnikov rifles, explosive devices, and we had also from the surrounding roads around the hospital, we had mortar fire from those premises on the hospital itself to try and hit our forces. So we found and confronted a substantial battle in the premises of the hospital. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, what were terrorists doing in the hospital?
The question I asked you, Lieutenant Colonel, I do understand that it is very difficult in urban warfare to differentiate and even to work out the numbers who have been killed. But the question I asked you was, do you know how many civilians were killed in the operation?
We evacuated civilians and engaged the enemy. We did not target the civilians, we did not target the medical staff, we did not target the patients. Absolutely not.
So, but you have no idea how many civilians may or may not have been killed. Is that fair to say?
No, we did not. We didn't attack civilians. We attacked Hamas terrorists.
Okay. One of the people that we spoke to said that the Israeli field hospital that was promised did not appear, and that patients were not treated by Israeli medical staff, again, who were promised to replace the staff of the hospital who were otherwise engaged?
We indeed did establish a small ward for medical treatment. I know that we had a flow of medical supplies, food supplies, and medical staff that came in and facilitated, but there were Palestinian staff that remained in the hospital premises, and they were dealing out with the medical services, not the IDF. I'm not aware of any field hospital that the IDF was supposed to establish, so I don't know where that came from.
The same witness told us that he saw what he described as a mass grave or mass graves in the hospital complex. Are you aware of any of those?
No, I'm not aware of that. What we've seen throughout the recent hours, of course, is the images of a battleground. Yes. So we need to be cautious in jumping to conclusions what we're seeing based on what people are saying out on the ground. We conducted a substantial combat. As you rightly pointed out, some 200 terrorists. We arrested 500 more that have been identified as Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists, and there are some 400 others that are still being processed. It's an ongoing operation. I can tell you that we've revealed extensive documentation, extensive weaponry, all of these things that should not be in the hospital premises. We would not have to go to the Shifa compound if Hamas hadn't turned it into this fortress of hate.
You have now withdrawn from the complex. As you'll be aware, international humanitarian law demands that after any attack, you need to facilitate or implement measures for the rapid restoration of healthcare services, i.e. provide military medical support for the civilian medical facility. Are you doing that?
There are alternative places within the Gaza Strip to receive medical assistance. Indeed, it is a war zone, so it is very challenging. And I can say that every day there is medical supplies that are going into the Gaza Strip, either through the Kerem Shalom crossing or through Rafah.
But you are not providing direct military medical support to replace that which has been destroyed in Al-Shifa Hospital. Is that fair to say?
The IDF is currently engaged in a war against a ruthless enemy that will utilize the civilian infrastructure. We have not established a boots on the ground attitude with regard to medical assistance at this stage. And as I said, there are alternatives, and that's why the situation, as one of your interviewees mentioned, when we were asked to coordinate evacuation and we tried to facilitate it, it was actually the Palestinian side that refused to evacuate on the terms that worked in conjunction with the military operation that was taking place.
Lieutenant Colonel, we will leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner of the Israeli Defense Forces there. Coming up.
It gets women out of the house, having a good time, they're loosening up, they're laughing, they're relaxed. And if we didn't have something like this coming in Queens, then I think they would still be in the house.
Comedian Shazia Mirza on why her female-only alcohol-free tour is so important for women. Get in touch with us on social media, use the hashtag BBCWATO. Our email address is, as ever, world@1@bbc.co.uk. We do love to hear from you. The National Living Wage, one of the government's flagship policies aimed at helping the low paid, goes up today, rising from £10.42 an hour to £11.44, an increase of almost 10%. Those less than 23 years old get a national minimum wage, also rising from £7.49 an hour to £8.60. Both the living wage and the minimum wage are generally seen as one of the great public policy successes of the last 25 years, helping lift many out of poverty. And whilst it was the Labour government that introduced the minimum wage, it was the Conservative Chancellor, George Osborne, who put something of a rocket under it by instructing the Low Pay Commission to make the minimum wage 60% of average pay, of median pay, by 2020. It's now above that proportion at 2/3 of median wages. And for the moment, that's where it'll stand, as the government has asked the Low Pay Commission to pause any further rises until after the election. Paul Novak is the General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Johnny.
This is a hugely successful policy. You must wish to offer your congratulations to the Conservative government.
Well, as you say, I mean, the national minimum wage actually came about from the previous Labour government, and actually thanks to campaigning by trade unions and anti-poverty campaigners and others. But I think one of the successes of the minimum wage is as we have built a political consensus. If you cast your mind back 25, 26 years ago, Conservative politicians and employers' organisations alike were warning that national minimum wage would cause mass unemployment, would send the economy into a meltdown. None of that happened, and as you say, this has been a real policy success, and we want the government to build on that policy success and be equally bold and ambitious for the future of the minimum wage.
Well, part of that policy success, and I know it sounds like I'm not scoring any political points, but part of that has been from the Conservative government, which set this target to the Low Pay Commission of 60% of median wage, the national minimum wage. That's now sort of paused. Where do you want it to go from here? Where is there a target that TUC would like to see established?
Well, absolutely, because we want to see the national minimum wage become a real living wage, and for us that means moving to £15 an hour as soon as possible. Managed by the Low Pay Commission, so that we don't see any negative economic side effects. But the reality is, Johnny, I mean, there won't be many people listening to this programme today who think that they can bring up a family, build a life on £11.44 an hour on a sustainable basis, but that's what millions of people in this country have to do. So we've called on the government to be more ambitious, to move beyond the 2/3 target, to set the target for the minimum wage over the next few years at something more like 3/4 of median earnings. That would be a pay boost to millions of people, but it would also actually put money in the pockets of ordinary working people and their families, and hopefully support the wider economy.
When employers turn to you or to the Low Pay Commission and say, £15 an hour, 3/4 of median wages, it is too much for us, we're either going to have to lose profits or we're going to lose investment, what do you say?
Well, I think those arguments are pretty familiar. I think there are a couple of things. First of all, this process is always overseen by the Low Pay Commission, which brings together employers, unions, independent academics to make recommendations to government. They're weighing up all of the economic impacts of the minimum wage. But to be honest with you, Johnny, employers have been saying this since the inception of the minimum wage and beyond. I mean, employers were warning that the minimum wage was going to cost hundreds of thousands of jobs before the minimum wage was introduced. Every significant hike, there's been siren voices saying this is going to have an impact on employment. None of that has come to pass, and I actually think we should set ourselves an ambitious target to bring millions of people out of poverty, to give them a decent wage to live on. I mean, we've got a crisis in a sector like social care, where we know, for example, the vast majority of people are earning the minimum wage or on and around the minimum wage. 1 in 4 are on 0-hours contracts, and we've got 150,000 staff vacancies. Boosting the pay of those workers has got to be part of the solution. That's why we are ambitious for the future of the minimum wage.
What about enforcement? Around a third of a million people less than minimum wage. What is the role of unions in that? What's the role for any enforcement body?
Well, we clearly need more enforcement from governments. Britain historically has had low levels of enforcement, not just of the minimum wage, but employment rights generally. But I think actually unions do play a key role, because it's one thing about having the right, including the right to the minimum wage, and there's another thing actually exercising that right. And where unions are present, we definitely make sure our members get the minimum wage, at least, because that's the very least they deserve.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Paul Novak, General Secretary of the Trades Union. With good weather come small boats crossing the channel, bringing hundreds of migrants to these shores every day. 349 migrants landed on Saturday, 442 yesterday, pushing the total number for the first quarter of the year to a record well over 5,000, a whopping 43% up on last year. The challenge for the government, both practical, housing for those claiming asylum, for example, and political. Few issues raise such ire amongst voters, especially Conservative migrant voters, as migration, and in particular the inability to secure the border. The government has enjoyed some success in bringing numbers down. Last year saw a huge fall in small boat arrivals as a returns policy struck with Albania slashed the total arrivals. But migration continues to gnaw at the government's popularity, leaving an opening on the Right for Reform UK, which opinion polls suggest could lead to the evisceration of the Conservatives in an election. First, the numbers and what they mean. Madeline Sumption is director of Oxford University's Migration Observatory.
the data we have for this year actually really don't tell us very much about what the whole year is going to look like. When you have a relatively small percentage of people moving in a particular period, just a relatively small spike upwards in those numbers can look like a really big percentage. I think it's just too early to say what the whole year is going to look like.
Do we have any idea yet about the makeup of those coming here? I mean, in particular about the nationalities of those coming here. We saw a big distortion, didn't we, in 2022, because of a very large number of Albanians. Do we have any understanding of what it is so far this year?
Not so far this year, but we have the long-term picture. So as we said, in 2022, there were a lot of Albanians who came in small boats. Now, the main reason that we then saw a decrease in 2023 was that many fewer Albanians came. That was by far the biggest driver of the decrease. The top countries, now they vary a little bit over time, but it tends to be places like Afghanistan, typically being one of the top. Iran also has been a significant country of origin for people crossing in small boats.
Do we have any understanding as to pull factors and whether or not they are changing according to different perceptions of the environment over here, in particular of the Rwanda policy?
It's very difficult to say what the impact of specific policies is. For example, the debates about Rwanda right now. We do have evidence, if you look over the last 20 years or so in countries like the UK, what has been the impact of different types of policies, for example, designed to deter asylum seekers from coming and putting in a claim. And typically those policies have found that the impact of policy is quite small, but it's factors other than policy, so things like conflicts and inequality around the world that tends to drive people to apply for asylum. Now, obviously the Rwanda policy is a little bit different from many of the policies that other countries have implemented, and so it's possible that its impact will be different, but it's very difficult to predict at this stage, and I think it will depend in large part on how many people actually get sent to Rwanda.
As far as this year is concerned, then, your thought is wait and see for what happens over the summer, which is traditionally the busiest time, and what will be the overall figure for 2024.
That's right. The government is clearly hoping that the declines that we saw in 2023 will continue over the summer. That's certainly possible, although I think the caution there is that because so much of the decline in 2023 happened as a result of fewer Albanians coming to the UK, and now there just aren't many Albanians at all, it might be that the scope for reductions is much less this year, because the people who are coming across in large numbers, people from places like Afghanistan or Iran, are coming for quite different reasons probably than the Albanians were coming, and so it may be that they are less dissuaded by some of the things that the government has been doing, for example.
That was Madeleine Sumption of Oxford University's Migration Observatory. The Home Office told us the unacceptable number of people who continue to cross the Channel demonstrates exactly why we must get flights to Rwanda off the ground as soon as possible. We continue to work closely with the French police, who are facing increasing violence and disruption on their beaches as they work tirelessly to prevent these dangerous, illegal and unnecessary journeys. Tim Norton is Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham and sits on the Home Affairs Committee. Good afternoon, Mr. Norton.
Good afternoon, Johnny.
Can I first of all see if you have ideas, if you have thoughts as to why you think the numbers have climbed so much already this year, and I suppose what you think about the year to come?
I detected a big sigh in your voice before you asked that question. There's a bit of a sense of deja vu here. Look, as Madeleine said, I think it's too easy, too early to predict for the whole of the year. They are very erratic figures, and of course we had very bad weather earlier this year, which meant a big delay in people then trying to get across. But there are other factors at play as well, and I think Rwanda is one of them. We've seen this before over the last few years when there's been a change of policy, when there's been legislation coming in, and when Brexit was going to happen, where people smugglers who are ruthless but pretty smart go around speaking to their potential clients, warning them that you need to get over quickly because it's going to be harder because the laws change in the UK, or this Rwanda policy is coming in. And of course now, with the likelihood, we hope, of the Rwanda policy actually becoming a reality at last, those messages are going around that people need to get in a boat and pay thousands of euros to ruthless people smugglers to get across the Channel, whilst it's less difficult than when the Rwanda policy comes in. And there's just one bit of evidence for that is when the Home Affairs Select Committee went to Paris and Calais last year, and we spoke to everybody in charge of the operation on the Calais beaches, we were told in no uncertain terms that when the government announced the Rwanda policy the previous year, there was a huge surge in migrants around Calais approaching the French authorities to try and regularize their position in France, because they didn't want to risk ending up on a plane to Rwanda. So we know potentially it does have a big deterrent factor.
And the irony is, of course, that ever since a certain date last year, anyone who arrives in this manner will be eligible for deportation to Rwanda if your legislation actually gets onto the statute books. It makes no difference whether they came a month ago or 3 months ago or next week.
Correct. That's not what the people smugglers tell those people trying to get across. They're absolutely right. Since the legal migration bill went through, those people coming across in that way will not have grounds to apply for asylum, however good they think their claim may be.
How much of a political problem is this for you as an individual MP and for the Conservatives as a party? I mean, how much do you think pain is it causing currently? How much might the Rwanda bill change things?
Well, I think it is really frustrating. What I object to is when people say, "Oh, it's only people on the right who really care about this." But when I go around speaking to my constituents and knocking on doors, and we've been doing a lot of that recently, people are just frustrated, not at the fact that we've got people coming to this country because we've got a proud tradition of giving safe haven to genuine asylum seekers. That's not the issue. The issue is not necessarily just the numbers. It's people who are abusing the system, who have the money to pay people smugglers to come across in the most inappropriate and dangerous way, are effectively jumping the queue. And those victims, most of all, are those with genuine asylum claims who are being bumped down the list. So it's that frustration of the apparent lack of control still